What's our movie we're going to discuss? The Dark Knight. All right, so where would you like to start?
I guess Harvey Dent.
Harvey Dent. So what did you see in regard to the character of Harvey Dent?
So I thought it was interesting that after he was in the explosion and he literally when he became Two-Face, he kind of displayed signs of splitting. Like he started to view Jim Gordon as he used to view Gordon as as a partner and kind of it was more nuanced, but then at the end of the movie he viewed him as sort of like the cause of the problems in Gotham. It was like all bad, like he's sort of all good versus all bad in this point.
Yeah. So, and I completely agree with you. I think it's probably worthwhile to review kind of something we started earlier with our previous discussion, and that's this idea of dissociative identity disorder, or DID, and why this is not DID, right? While I think metaphorically we can go there, and again, this is more of an origin story for Harvey Dent than it is anything else. But the etiology of the behavior that we observe at the end of The Dark Knight is a maladaptive defense mechanism. It really is not true dissociation, and it's not true, therefore not true DID. I mean, if we were to ask Two-Face, what happened? My gut says that he would have full recall of the events that are contained in the plot of The Dark Knight. Therefore, ruling against, if not out, DID. Right? DID is when an individual has an alter take over the conscious awareness, and they have amnesia or for the episode in which that occurs. Right? So, splitting, yeah. Now, is there any evidence of splitting prior to the trauma?
There's something he makes a comment at one point in time that they used to call him Two-Faced, which could be, or it could just be very regimented thinking in different situations.
Right.
It's hard to tell without context.
It is hard to tell, and it might just be something that was pejorative from or with the people that he was working with/for.
Maybe with his girlfriend Rachel, he was kind of like, do you love me or not? Like it's a yes or no. Like you either fully love me or you fully don't.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a little bit of like either she's like the perfect girlfriend for me or not at all.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that you really piggybacking on that, a lot of what we see in his role might be an over-idealization, right? And we see the opposite, the devaluation post-trauma. So the answer is probably yes, that we actually do see evidence of this, albeit that other half, where he's over-idealized. And that might also be reflected in his relationship as well, right? So, in the remake, that is the sequel, if the sequel is going to focus on Harvey Dent, what are some other attributes to this character that you would inform the writer-producer to include to make this evidence-based?
Maybe, I don't want to say for sure, a personality disorder, but, he has, some traits of it.
Give me those traits.
For, maybe borderline, it's, he's very kind of, labile emotionally, and, he has this sort of squinting pattern. He's kind of, very obsessive over Rachel, and when, things don't go his way, he gets very upset over it, in terms of the relationship, he knows that Batman or Bruce Wayne and Rachel had a past, and he gets very insecure about that as well. And kind of labile in that sense.
And I completely agree with you. And I think if we're going to just put on our quasi-producer cap for a second, I like the idea of not only Rachel being in the sequel, she has to be, but at the very beginning, it established that she has terminated the relationship so that there can be significant abandonment issues that then are represented or demonstrated in the main character. This is a movie about Harvey Dent, because that is incredibly consistent with borderline personality, and I think would make it very evidence-based, right? So now, remember, just in a broader context, when you take your exam, these conditions, the personality disorders, although they're currently classified along 3 clusters, and it is true, you should appreciate, especially clinically, how there tend to be overlapping signs and symptoms. For test-taking purposes, I would strongly recommend you recluster them into 2 columns. That is, those personality disorders that adhere to a cardinal trait, and that really it's the one that doesn't. And that's borderline. Right? So before we get to borderline, let's talk about the others. Right? Just so we really hammer this out for your shelf exam. By the way, if, hypothetically, no video here, hypothetically, I were to challenge you guys, name me all the personality disorders, here's the door, you're done, you get honors. Miss one. Not only do you fail your clerkship, you remediate your M2. Question is this. Who takes that challenge right now?
Well, I have it in front of me right here, so I'll take it.
Who else takes that challenge right now?
So yeah.
All right, so I would have hoped that the hand would go straight up, right? Yeah, thank you for being honest. So my gut says is that after we run through this, you're likely to attend this quite differently, right? So first and foremost, I want you to take the cluster A personality disorders. And by the way, what are they?
Schizoid, schizotypal.
And?
Paranoid.
Perfect, right? And forget it. Convince yourself that they are not true personality disorders, but instead prodromes to schizophrenia. Because once you really frame them as etiologies, risk factors for schizophrenia, you cut down the number of personality disorders that you then have to memorize and then recognize by 3. Right? So that's number 1. Number 2, can you name the 7 deadly sins? And I like asking this question after I assigned the movie 7. But you alluded to this morning. Can you name those murders?
So gluttony.
Envy, greed, wrath,
Pride.
Lust.
sloth,
Wrath.
wrath.
I think you got it.
Become wrath, yeah.
I think you actually got it.
I think I did.
If I was paying attention close enough. Okay. What you just named for me were the 7 personality disorders that remain per cluster B and C.
Oh.
Because they match up really, really nicely. Now, first and foremost, I want you to remember one thing. Gluttony is an outlier.
Right.
Gluttony, as you probably recall in the movie,
Yeah, yes,
is the first
it's the first
crime
one.
committed.
Yeah, it's the first one.
The first one. And Fincher gets this right because gluttony, and more specifically, its equivalent in psychology is also a gateway. That is, egocentrism begets the personality disorders, especially those from cluster B. An individual's inability or incapacity to view a perspective other than one's own is egocentrism. And that does establish risk for developing the cluster B personality disorder. So gluttony is a gateway sin. Gluttony is the gateway crime in the film. And for us, the equivalent of gluttony in psychology is also a gateway that is a risk factor specifically for developing the cluster B personality disorders. Which are what?
Borderline. Narcissistic.
Antisocial.
Histrionic.
Perfect. Can you name me the 4 deadly sins?
Okay, so histrionic is going to be lost.
Yeah.
Histrionic is actually not lust.
Oh,
Isn't
And
that-
and this, by the way, it's arbitrary. This isn't published anywhere, so you're not wrong. But it fits better elsewhere.
oh, okay. Well, so narcissistic, I would think pride.
Narcissistic is actually envy. And the reason why
Oh, all right.
envy is a better selection than pride, not that individuals with narcissism aren't prideful, but envy is actually in the diagnostic criteria set. Is envious of others or believes others are envious of them. It's right there. They actually contain a deadly sin in the DSM definition. So that's why envy is a better fit there.
Is lust histrionic?
Lust is antisocial personality disorder. We talked about antisocial personality disorder earlier especially when there is no evidence of conduct prior to the age of 15. And that this clinical term called psychopathy may be substituted. Well, when we look at antisocial and even psychopathy, we look at different, and if we could focus on real or true crime, we look at a subset that are referred to as lust murders. So forensic psychology actually uses the L word clinically. Therefore, I think lust matches up quite nicely. At least it makes us remember of this variant called psychopathy, right? Antisocial personality absent that history of conduct disorder. What's borderline personality? And I'll give you a hint.
Right.
And again, not wrong, but a better answer because it actually is a diagnostic criterion.
Envy.
Huh?
Envy.
No. That's a diagnostic criteria of narcissistic personality.
Between greed and wrath.
Wrath. Anger is a diagnostic criteria of borderline personality. And that leaves us with histrionic, which is fine.
Histrionic was, is that greed or pride?
Pride, histrionic personality. That leaves us cluster C. That leaves us 3 remaining disorders for which we have 2 deadly sins left. How do we resolve this? Anybody? Anybody here go to Catholic school? No. Am I going to tell?
I mean, my father's Catholic, and I'm Lutheran, so I reject Catholicism.
The reason why I ask is because in Catholic school, you might have been taught that there are 2 forms of sloth.
Mm.
One form is called acedia. Acedia is along the lines of anhedonia. I don't want to be bothered. Listlessness. Anhedonia, acedia.
So that'd be avoid.
Yep, exactly right. The other form of sloth is called tristidia. Tristidia is, why bother? It's not going to happen anyway. It's like learned helplessness, tristidia, which is dependent personality. That leaves 1 deadly sin for the remaining personality disorder in cluster C called obsessive compulsive personality, which actually, as a diagnostic criterion, includes frugality, greed. All right, so that's a quick way to remember the personality disorders if you hesitate and can't remember all 10. Fraction off the 3 that are cluster A, convince yourself they are the etiologies of schizophrenia, at least from a psychological or psychosocial perspective. Remaining 7 match up with the 7 deadly sins. Gluttony is an outlier. It's a gateway to all the above, but no fear, we split sloth into its 2 forms and account for the 7 remaining personality disorders from cluster B and C. Now, when we reorganize these, borderline personality is in a group by itself. All the others really conform to a cardinal trait. Just know that cardinal trait, and you know the examples, or you could come up with examples, which, by the way, then morph into those clinical criteria. That is, those aspects that will be represented in the vignette on your shelf exam. You want to go over the cardinal traits, or you just want to go to borderline? I'll leave it up to you guys.
Cardinal traits would be good.
Cardinal traits are going to be good. All right, so cluster A. Paranoid personality disorder, pervasive distrust, or suspiciousness of others. Here's your cardinal trait. Because then you'll see, as evidenced by behaviors that may include blank or more of the following, and then there's that criteria list. Pervasive distrust or suspiciousness of others. Schizoid personality. Individuals who are emotionally distant and are content being isolated. Untitled personality, individuals who are emotionally distant and eccentric. Example, natural thinking. Cluster B, antisocial personality disorder. We reviewed this more than once, most recently this morning. Blatant disregard for and violation of others' rights. Narcissistic, individual who is haughty or arrogant, believes they're special and that only those as special as they can understand them. Histrionic, the individual who needs to be the center of attention. Cluster C. Again, notice we skipped borderline. Cluster C, obsessive compulsive personality. Individual who is perfectionistic, requires order and control. Your type A personality. Dependent, an individual who needs validation or reassurance for their every next step. And then finally, avoidant personality is straightforward. Individuals who avoid and therefore remain distant, but who are not content and therefore conflicted, differentiating them from individuals with schizoid personality disorder. So those are those cardinal traits. And again, if you want to just review the personality disorders tonight, look over those DSM criteria, convince yourself they are nothing but example after example of what you now know. Much more readily identified on a test. The outlier, borderline personality. Now, fortunately, we can begin to discuss the very diagnostic criteria, and it's not going to be too difficult to remember, despite they're not adhering to a cardinal trait. So let's first appreciate that the deadly sin is in the criteria set, anger, aka wrath. Number two, there are three other criteria that match directly with underlying defense mechanisms. So what are the defenses, and what are the criteria that link to them?
Avoidant?
Not avoidant. Avoidant is avoidant personality disorder. That's the distinguishing maladaptive defense there.
So wait, sorry, can you say the question again?
The three characteristic defense mechanisms underlying borderline personality and the diagnostic criteria that link directly to each.
So like splitting?
Good, and then it leads to what? What's the diagnostic criteria? How about that manifest clinically?
Extreme viewpoints on situations, rapid fluctuations between those extremes.
Exactly right. Next.
Attention seeking, like suicidality sometimes, or demonstrative, like self-injury.
You nailed the criterion. What defense mechanism is thought to underlie the suicidal ideation or gestures defining a borderline personality?
Sadness?
Passive aggression.
Oh, passive aggression.
Passive aggression is the inward turning of a nihilistic impulse. Okay? After having blatantly exposed a medical student and insulting him and embarrassing him, he gets mad, angry. Not because you're borderline, because that's a reaction. Unfortunately, your supervisor, who is still in control of your grade, isn't someone you're likely to confess or discharge your anger toward, because after the grade, perhaps on cats, definitely, but your super ego is holding you back right now. Where's that anger going to go? Well, it depends. It depends on which defense operates. And if it's passive aggression, that anger, instead of being focused and discharged towards the perpetrator, towards the object, is turned inward. So there might be a suicide attempt. Or punching the wall. Well, no, actually, it's a bad example. That's displacement. Okay. So that's the idea. Inward turning of a nihilistic impulse. Whether it's due to a normal interaction or whether it's due to a pathological and maladaptive personality. One more. And see, it's so easy that it's difficult. Dissociation. Dissociation is a diagnostic criterion, and dissociation is a defense mechanism. Now, the dissociation as a defense is related to, but really is different from, dissociation, as we think of it, pardon the pun, in regard to the dissociative disorders. Dissociation as a defense is a rapid but temporary change in one's affect from an unpleasant mood state to one that's more pleasant. So it's an over-the-top drama of the hello or the entrance. So it's a rapid, albeit temporary, replacement of a more positive affect, of a negative affect to one that is positive. Right? So, and that's also, by the way, defining of histrionic personality disorder. Both employ dissociation as a defense. In the case of borderline, it appears as a diagnostic criteria. In the histrionic personality, it does not. But that defense governs both. That is the common defense of both personality disorders. So if you think of the defense mechanisms characteristic of borderline, remember the deadly sin, you have 4 criteria right there. So you're well on your way. Okay. All right. How did we get here? This is Harvey, right?
Yeah.
So, his origin story is established in The Dark Knight. If he were to have his own spin-off, his character may in fact be depicted as borderline personality. And I think rage and anger would be a large part of his character development. And I think abandonment issues, by the way, yes, another diagnostic criterion would require Rachel being cast in the sequel. By the way, anybody here ever hear the movie Fatal Attraction? In Fatal Attraction, starring Glenn Close, there's a scene in which she is in Central Park with, I think his name is Dan, portrayed by, blanking on, Michael Douglas. That scene establishes fairly significant mood lability. And if that is point 0, 37 minutes later, there are abandonment issues that are revealed to be central to the plot. And within those 37 minutes, Glenn Close's character, as Alex Forrest, demonstrates every single diagnostic criteria defining a borderline personality. It's like a right out of a DSM. 37 minutes. Back to Harvey. Anything else here? Any other characters in The Dark Knight you want to discuss?
I mean, I would say the Joker definitely is like a psychopath. Probably, if he had like an origin story, I would expect like conduct disorder in his past and like antisocial personality disorder.
I would definitely inquire about that. No doubt about that. And there is some history given by the Joker in terms of his father, an alcoholic and incredibly physically abusive. And then, of course, I was tempted to. I think we discussed it, but decided not to because I think it would be just a little too much. And that is assign and watch to discuss Joker, creating or verifying an origin story. But I just thought the conversation would then just be too focused on one character. But very straightforward, blatant disregard for and violation of others' rights. There's no doubt about that. And I think if there's one teaching point here, it would be to strongly consider an underlying medical condition in as much as Joker establishes a neurological condition and what role that might play. I'm not sure if it does, but it's certainly something worth investigation. Any other aspects about the Joker here?
I thought it was interesting that some of his minions or the people he manipulated were all like schizophrenic patients.
Yeah.
Like there's the one guy dressed as a police officer who was like a paranoid schizophrenic, and then there's the other guy with a bomb in his stomach, and he said like, oh, the Joker said my visions would go away, like kind of alluding to.
Exactly right, yeah. Clearly social commentary about the state of psychiatry and behavioral health. But also, again, pulling, albeit from another film, Suicide Squad, the idea that this behavior might be modeled. Anybody here watch Suicide Squad?
Yeah.
Whose behavior is Joker modeling and taking advantage of these patients?
The people at the mental ward that he was taken to,
More specific.
Harley Quinn.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Harley Quinn is a psychiatrist who kind of breaches ethics. Maybe? Tongue in cheek, you can't tell with the mask, I'm kidding. Definitely breaches ethics. That behavior is being modeled in this film in as much as we identify Joker also taking advantage of individuals with severe and persistent mental illness, specifically schizophrenia, yeah. Yep. Which is interesting because he's on that ward then. He's got contact with them because he's established some kind of relationship with them post-discharge. So let's think this through. What's going on here? What do we think might afflict the Joker? Other than the obvious. And I'm not pulling from the Joaquin Phoenix mythos. And I think the answer might be uncovered if you paid attention to this character and really watched him closely. What does he demonstrate that might shed light on this? What ails the Joker?
Maybe, I guess, like, he's kind of delusional, thinking, like, he keeps talking about how the government has all these plans for things, and he gets very pigeonholed on things, and he kind of has the delusion that, like, it's not a good thing, and that there should be, like, you know, like, chaos and anarchy.
I agree. Anything else? So, I've seen Jared Leto. I've seen Joaquin Phoenix. I've seen Cesar Romero. I haven't seen Heath Ledger ever play the Joker. I didn't see this film. Describe to me how this character was portrayed.
He's very kind of very detached from others, very willing to like manipulate or lie. There's like he's never very truthful or consistent in the things he says.
How does it look?
He's got scars and old makeup and he looks dirty.
Go on. You were in Arkham, that's where your third year medical student clerkship was. You rotated through, you got the opportunity to provide a full examination on this character, and you're coming out and now providing me with your mental status assessment, ABC Stamblinker. A, B, appearance, behavior. Anything else that should be included?
Is it sadism?
Sorry?
Sadism?
More specific.
Like wanting to torment others, like other people's egos.
Yeah, I could see that. I wonder, and I would wonder what that's about. I mean, I would guess that's rooted in his relationship with his father, but more focused on appearance and behavior.
He's actually, like, pretty cooperative when he was, like, interrogated.
He probably will be. And as much as he is cooperative with you, as you're sitting across the table from him, I would want you to keep a social distance. Anything else? You don't think he has EPS? He's got perioral movements throughout the entire film. Right? You're definitely going to report those under behavior, right? EPS has to be reported under behavior here. Right? I mean, you might also report them with a neurologic exam. That's perfectly fine, but it's one of those things that we think of as an example that's reportable under B, behavior. So what does that tell you about his treatment in our camp?
Just try on some like antipsychotic.
I think that's fair, yeah. And if you had to guess, it's probably, it's not definitive here, but it's probably going to be a typical or first generation versus an atypical second generation. But it could be a second generation, or it could have even been switched. And I doubt, and please, if you disagree with me, let me know, that he's remained compliant with his discharge meds. Right? Doubt. Yet, the movements persist, which again would kind of support that this is tardive dyskinesia, that is an irreversible neurological syndrome, that is a late onset side effect of antipsychotics in general. There's a little bit more here, though. He's interacting with very severely mentally ill individuals who identify themselves as being afflicted with schizophrenia. So he's on that particular ward, or at least interacts with them in some capacity, especially enough to convince them to remain in contact post-hospital discharge. Who is most likely to get EPS upon exposure to antipsychotic therapy? And the answer is individuals with an illness for which antipsychotic therapy is not FDA approved. Now, individuals with schizophrenia can get EPS. I didn't say that. But an individual with another condition with psychotic features is at higher risk for developing EPS when compared to
Oh, it's just-
cohort.
It's like MDD.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And his MDD with psychotic features may have been so severe, and maybe the psychiatrist at that institution, and let me tell you, I'm not really enamored with the care provided by Harley Quinn, or, I'm forgetting his name, Scarecrow, to really entrust them to having gotten his diagnosis right. The staff, the medical staff at this particular institution, is nothing to write home about. So is it reasonable to assume that somebody with severe major depressive disorder, that is MDD severe, with psychotic features may have been misdiagnosed? Because the tardive might be consistent with that, at least the teaching point, that that population is in fact significantly more at risk for developing EPS than a cohort of individuals who have psychotic or psychotic illness, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. Now, we know from the Joker's history that he had, and again, we could pull this from Joker as well, he had a history, developmental, even social history, that certainly poses risk for major depressive disorder. No doubt about that. So MDD, severe with psychotic features, might be his most likely diagnosis. And I wish I had numbers in terms of the prevalence of EPS in this population versus schizophrenia. I don't. I'll look it up, and I'll post it on Twitter this weekend. But there's one other thing too, in terms of just broadening or differential. The point prevalence of psychotic features and depression might be 10 to 20%. What is it for bipolar?
Isn't it like twice that?
Yeah, it's like 40 to 50%.
So, wait, sorry, 40-50% of what? Yeah, no.
People with bipolar have a psychotic episode
Oh, okay, I see.
versus like only 10 to 20%.
So we can't dismiss the fact that the Joker might be bipolar. And there's some evidence here, which is what? Other than the behavior itself.
It's a lot down in just a few days.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. Look, I guess we would call that goal-directed behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I'm worried about his father. Right? His father is portrayed as a quote-unquote alcoholic, so alcohol use disorder, but the behavior might actually be indicative of untreated bipolar, with a significant percentage of individuals with this condition, bipolar, having co-occurring substance use disorder. So maybe the alcohol use disorder is part of the problem, but the core, that is the mental disorder, might be bipolar. Bipolar, I believe, is number one among mental disorders. with the comorbidity rate with substance use disorder.
Well, isn't bipolar also the disorder with the highest genetic or familial linkage?
It's high, yeah.
Is that, I mean, it's highest, but it's.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So there's also genetic heritability.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So,
Yeah, so I'm just saying his father had it.
absolutely, no, definitely, that was my next point, yeah, you're exactly right. So, this might be a primary mood disorder with psychotic features, misdiagnosed, and therefore mistreated. By the way, bipolar with psychotic features, MDD with psychotic features gets ECT. I guess they don't have that at RCAM. It sounds like it is an involuntary facility, and involuntary facilities are not allowed to offer ECT. You've got to be voluntary status to consent to electroconvulsive therapy. And we know that RCAM is in fact involuntary. So that is consistent. But again, all of the above, this entire conversation is built on the idea that this is not due to the direct and physiologic effects of a substance or medical condition. And while substances do not appear to play a role, although given his father's alcohol use disorder, that's questionable, that's definitely a concern, again, heritability. But that medical condition is established, albeit in another film, Joker, and definitely needs closer inspection. Any other thoughts about Joker? Any other characters you'd like to discuss? All right, we'll end it there. Take a brief break, come back, get those two presentations out of the way. We're good to go.
I wanted to check, you mentioned sending